We will start session 2. Just before I let them speak, I just wanted to give you a bit of introduction to this team. I would say these are the pioneers of Pacific IGF. So please give them a big round of applause as we welcome them. I will let them introduce themselves and say a few words about themselves. But on my right here, furthest down, is Kit Davidson, who is he's a friend, and also he's been supportive of Pacific IGF ever since. And he used to be with Internet NZ at the time, and I believe he'll tell you more about his engagement. But he's been very vocal, been very focused on supporting the Pacific in terms of internet governance and ICT. We do have Rieko, Dr. Rieko, who is here as well. She has been with us all those years from USP and PSAR and all those, and she'll tell us more about that. And also next is Thompson, who's been also been in the Pacific and has been doing a lot of projects. He's been with USP, and she'll tell you more about that. And the far right is our special friend Don Hollander. Same, he has a lot of history, a lot of engagement in the Pacific. He spent some time in Samoa. He'll tell you more. I think he speaks the dialect, so he'll tell you more about that. And online we have Ellen Strickland, who has recently been left Internet NZ, but she has been with this group for quite some time. And I think a few of us here might know this group if you don't know them, but some like Anjo and Noya, I believe they know these people, and Sakayo somewhere there, yeah. But I'll let them introduce themselves, and then they'll continue with the discussions themselves. Thank you. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Andrew and Sarai, and the sponsors of this event for inviting this panel of, well, largely grey-bearded, ageing, grumpy old men. Kia ora tātou, and I use that as an informal Maori greeting because I think we're now entering into a more informal session. My job in this panel is to be provocative. Andrew has asked us to recount some of internet governance history in the Pacific, so we're going to go through that. But I will be the last speaker in terms of that coverage. But before we formally begin, I want to pay some tribute to our internet governance pioneers in the Pacific. These were people, I think, who were all personally present in Noumea in 2011, where we had about 100 people along for a Pacific internet governance event. And these 4 people have subsequently passed away, sadly, as powerful voices for the Pacific. Firstly, there's Laimao Okateva Tanavusa Savia, who we all knew as Tevi. She passed away in Samoa in December 2018. We fondly remember her, the General Manager of Computer Services Limited, and she was the CCTLD Manager for .ws. She was very outspoken, a powerful voice for the Pacific and for civil rights on the internet. The Samoan government has just recently opened Tevi's Learning Centre at the Samoa Primary School, and this is a specific tribute to Tevi. And it's really interesting noting their opening speech about her dedication for this learning centre, saying she was a powerful voice when she was at school. You couldn't argue with her, so a fine tribute to Tevi, who never took a step backwards. Secondly, Donny De Freitas, he passed away in Samoa on the 29th of May 2020, aged 63. He was from St Vincent and the Grenadines. He was the first of the government regulators appointed in the Pacific, and worked tirelessly in Samoa to deregulate the telecommunications space, and saw through a number of regulatory reforms leading to very competitive telecommunications and internet subsequently. Thirdly, Frank Louis, who was a companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit, who passed away in Niue on the 9th of July 2021. He was a former Prime Minister or Premier of Niue in the 1990s, and in later years he was a leader in the Internet Users Society of Niue and the .nu operation. But we have a legacy from Frank. It comes to us through his son Imani Louis, who is now an MP in Niue, a fine internet technologist. I don't know if you're here, Imani. Sadly no. But he has built networks in Auckland and in Niue, and is a big promoter of the multi-stakeholder model. And finally, I'll try to get my tongue around this, Salanita Tamanakawa Maro from Fiji. She passed away in 2023 in her early 40s. Her first experience of internet governance was in Numia in 2011, and she was a barrister and solicitor in Fiji and a civil rights activist, but she stepped immediately forward to the microphone in Numia and asserted various aspects of internet governance and multi-stakeholderism, and got very involved in ICANN and the Internet Society and in internet governance generally, and served on the MAG for a number of years. So these four people have done a great deal to establish the Pacific voice in internet governance, and I hope are examples for all you young people in the room to aspire to be future leaders and to be outspoken and have your say and be involved and be engaged and argue and debate, because that's what multi-stakeholderism is all about. So I give a tribute to those four, and may you walk in their footsteps. Thank you. Now, our first speaker, I've decided that we're going to do ladies first in the misogynistic style of old. Our first speaker for this panel is Rieko Hayakwawa, who's been involved in internet governance internationally and with a view of the Pacific for 25, 30 years. 40 years, before internet governance was a word even. Welcome, Rieko.
Tenei te mihiki nga atua, nga mute, me nga mana venua nei. Kei te waka ihia te nei korero, ki a ratou ko nga tupuna. O te moana nui a kiwa I hono ai I te Indo-Pasifika ma runga waka. No nga mano tau ki mua. Te reira, tēnā kotu katua. I hope it doesn't make sense. Thank you. Thank you. I feel I come back to the old friend's house today. I thank you, Andrew, and PISOC board member, and conference organizer and sponsors, giving me a chance to talk today. My journey of ICT and Pacific Islands began in 1990, 1990. And at the beginning of the journey, I was responsible of USBNet and PSAT. And in 1997, I was able to make USBNet as Japan and New Zealand assisted project. I will not talk about USBNet and PSAT today, but we just published a paper last year, so if you are interested in, please contact me at break time or anytime. I will be here today and tomorrow. Today, I'd like to talk about how Pacific Island countries have moved the global internet governance. At the 2003 WSIS Tokyo conference, I invited a delegation from PIF, Pacific Island Forum, and PINA, Pacific Island News Association, to the Tokyo and organized side event at the United Nations University. WISIS is a series of the conference organized by ITU and UN Secretariat. Is it right? Yeah. Yes. The ITU is the oldest international organization in the world and is a group of the world's telephone company. At that time, they were hostile to the internet, screaming that VoIP and internet are taking over the telephone business. And the UN was also alarming by the US monopoly and internet governance. The WISIS World Summit on the Information Society was one of the major starting points for the debate of internet governance. At that time, Secretary General of ITU was Japanese bureaucrat named Yoshio Utsumi. When I read his documents, he does not hide his concern for the United States government. Utsumi criticized that fact that the US government looks into the privacy of all the world political leaders. We, PINA and PIF, who participated WISIS conference, organized a side event in Tokyo because the framework of Asia Pacific always overlooked Pacific Island countries. So we did not know that internet governance was a key theme of WISIS. However, Mr. Utsumi immediately understood and was very pleased with the political significance of the political participation of the Pacific Island countries, group of small countries, but with large number of voting rights in the international arena. And for perhaps the first time in the history of ITU, they started address the digital divide in the island states in the concrete and proactive manner. I think this was a good thing for Pacific Island countries. I will not talk about the end of US monopoly internet governance regime today. However, I'd like to emphasize that the impact of Pacific Island countries on WISIS, i.e., PIC's continued advocacy of the digital divide as a regional collective power, had a significant impact on the ICT and internet governance. The threat of nuclear war was the background of birth of internet, and the threat of North Korean missile connecting Marshall Island, FSM, and Guam via undersea cable. The threat of China is now major motivator for undersea cable all over the Pacific Islands. When looking at the development ICT, incentive towards security is inevitable. However, on the other hand, it is also true that Alexander Bell, his motivation for inventing the telephone was for his beloved wife, who had an audio impairment. So let's tell our government, your government, that ICT is important and necessary for Pacific Islands community, education, health, and future, and appeal to the international arena that it is as the collective voice will of the Pacific Island countries. Thank you.
And I think it would be fair to ask for any questions as each speaker speaks. So any questions for Rieko? No? You only get one chance. Right. Thank you very much, Rieko. Now, Ian Thompson. Ellen. She's online. And Dr. Strickland, welcome.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you well. Please introduce yourself and let us know what you're thinking about Pacific Internet governance.
Thank you, Keith. Kia ora koutou. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today remotely. Apologies, I can't be in person. So many people that I've known for so long that I would love to be catching up with, but it's great to have a chance to reflect a little bit about the theme of strengthening digital governance and resilience for the Pacific Islands and this idea of Pacific Pioneers. And, I had a think about it, and I'm really interested in kind of the role that civil society and community voices can play. It's something that I've been really a strong advocate for in my time. I'm currently at a Brainbox Institute, which is a New Zealand-based think tank. I've been at Internet NZ previously, as well as on the PICASOC board, and at the University of Queensland was involved in some research, and goes back to I worked for the National Commission for UNESCO, actually. And so I was going to share a bit about the Pacific pioneers that I met along the way, and some of the things that I kind of learned. I've always keep in mind the idea of the Pacific scholar Peli Hoafa about the future being behind us and that we walk backwards into it with the past in front of us, because the past is what we can see, and that the future we can't see. We can just look at that we had the past to look at and learn from as we walk backwards into that unknown future. And so reflecting about the pioneers I met along the way. Now, I was first involved in the Pacific in that role with the National Commission for UNESCO. I joined in the middle of the WSIS process, which thank you, Rieko, talking a bit about, and was involved in some of the community consultations in the Pacific. And I really took from that, those initial discussions about the information society being inclusive and thinking about the internet, but in terms of what it means to people as well as at technical layers. And so that really formed for me this idea of talking to civil society organizations about education, about health, about what does it mean to have information, what is the role the internet can play. And as we know now, that WSIS process, was the beginning of, a key milestone in internet governance, establishing the IGF. And the Pacific I learned such amazing things from those consultations, and also saw the Pacific acting in amazing ways on that world stage. I remember that there was a delegation from Samoa, I believe, who went to the WSIS and, brought dancing and Pacific culture and just made an amazing impact that, the internet is personal and it's about culture as well as the technical layers. I also had the opportunity to do some research. I was doing my master's at the time and work with and learn from telecenter operators. This is, 20 years ago, and talk to them. My research was about the problems of running internet or telecenters and internet in the community. But what I learned was the risks, the concerns they had, but also the amazing benefits that they were seeing in their communities around education and health, and the way that those pioneers bringing internet to communities through schools and women's centers were understanding the technology and navigating, their community's needs, their culture with this new technology, the internet, and finding concerns, but finding opportunities. And to me, I really saw, that being so important to the future of the internet, for the Pacific. Later on, I was involved in the digital strategy process, one of the third. And this was when I was teaching at the University of Queensland and doing my PhD. And again, I saw policymakers, international, regional governments, national governments working on this digital strategy. And I think for many people who've been involved in this in a long time, there were a number of them, what their impact was and how they happened is something that I think frustrated some people at the time, and for reasons that, I think are valid. But I also saw in that, the importance of community voices and civil society, and that those policymakers at their best were navigating the hard task of understanding community needs of Pacific communities and culture, and how you have a strategy that helps support, making the best of the internet, of digital governance, and that, that governance isn't just documents, that it's about doing the work of understanding and helping develop the internet to benefit communities and people. And so for me, that was really an important thing. And through that, I was lucky enough to be a part of the PIC ISOC board. And thank you to the organizers of this event today. I had the honor to work with just such a great, we use that word multi-stakeholder, but, a multi-stakeholder group of Pacific pioneers within PIC ISOC. To work with Anju, who I think is there, who was at SPC at the time, working in intergovernmental orgs, Theosi, who's now the Honorable Prime Minister of Tonga, Imani, who we mentioned, Louis, who was at the time climbing trees, putting up networks, and to really see how an organization of volunteers from around the region, could bring together before the Pacific IGF PAC-INET, which I had the honor and hard work alongside the PAC-INET people of pulling together these in-person fantastic meetings that were really about bringing together everybody, and all the voices, that we had wonderful engagement from, when I say civil society organizations, not just tech ones, disability organizations, a range of community organizations who had really helpful voices in shaping the internet for the Pacific. And so I guess that's, as I walk backwards into the future of the internet, but as we all do for the Pacific, I think about, all those pioneers and the work they've done, and how I know a lot of the people in the room today are policymakers, but and that, what can we do? And so I guess for me, I think there are things we do to build access and engagement directly from communities and civil society organizations. And I applaud those hugely. Fellowships, supporting capacity building to enable them to engage in digital governance. But also, that's not always going to be possible. And so the people from technical organizations doing the work to understand, I think is really important. I would say listen, and reflect and listen again. Because in the end, I think for me, digital governance and resilience is a messy process that is, the future is unknown, but it does need everyone. And we just have to keep doing the doing together and thinking about those things. So those are kind of the reflections that I have from it. And I'm really glad to be able to share and to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellen. Are there any questions for Ellen while we've got her? Again, only one chance.
So, Ellen, it's Don Hollander here. I used to have a bookshop. When you talked about getting people physically together for the PAC-INETs, which were originally Geek Fests, I think, do you think there's an opportunity for those sorts of things to occur again in the Pacific?
I think it's up to the people in this room. I hope so. I think that, you are all together today, and I wish I was there too. And I think, I think the answer is, I hope so. And I think that it's something we should all strive for. And the Pacific IGF is a part of that. And there's lots of capacity building initiatives and things that bring people together. And I do think that matters. Yeah.
Okay, any further questions? Right, thank you very much, Ellen. And now welcome to the stage, Ian.
Thanks, Keith, and thanks, Andrew, as well, for those kind words. For those of you who don't know me, and I really, a lot of good friends here, thank you. Good to catch up again. But I was going to start off by saying that I was the first regional ICT coordinator for the Pacific Islands. And listening to Rieko saying she started back in 1990, I think she really deserves the honour, it's not me. But I was appointed as the ICT Regional Coordinator in SPC in 2008. So my perspective is going to be a little bit more what's happened in the regional area, not development in countries, but about the region and what in particular, what we've learnt from that. So I was going to talk a little bit about the first regional digital plan, and then I might talk a bit about some of the projects that I managed in that role, and a quick summary of some of the key regional initiatives that I was involved with in some way or other. And I've been told by Andrew that I must ask a lot of questions. So if you don't ask the questions, I'll ask the questions. So the first item I wanted to talk about was the Pacific Island Digital Strategy. And before I get too far into that, I want to acknowledge Dr. Jimmy Rogers, who was the head of SPC at the time, and Sam Taufo, who was working as the ICT manager at that time. They played a huge role in forming that digital strategy and formulating a couple of key projects that would form the basis of that. And I know that Dr. Rogers is still active in the region, in the Solomon Islands, and I think Sam is there with him as well. So I just want to acknowledge their contribution. Kicking that first football is very important because you can't play the game unless you've kicked the first football. So when the digital strategy was developed, obviously there was some money needed to get it going. And Dr. Rogers and Sam, and I tell you, this is an anecdotal story, so please don't quote me, but it's what I understand happened. Dr. Rogers and Sam went down to Canberra and said, we have this digital strategy, now we want some money. And I said, oh, that's interesting, yes. How much money do you want? He said, $1 million. They laughed at him. And I must remind you that at that time, most aid agencies couldn't even spell ICT. So the interesting thing was that Sam and Dr. Rogers sat in that room and said, we're not leaving here until we get that $1 million. And somehow or other, Australian Aid came up with the money, and because of that, the project was kicked off, and I was hired as the regional coordinator to try and make that happen. So an interesting little anecdote. The two main projects that I was working on, and that came out of the digital strategy, was the rural internet connectivity system. So I'd say that was probably the first digital divide project that was made in the region. And then there was also the SPIN project, which was the plan to connect every island to submarine cables. And that was quite an ambitious goal at that time. I think Fiji had just become connected, or not long connected to the internet, and thinking about connecting other islands was a good initiative, but hard work. And the third project that I was working on was with the project called the One Laptop Per Child project. For those of you who don't remember that, this is yeah, it was a while ago. This was an initiative by MIT where they decided to develop a laptop that would cost $100, and they would make that available to every child in developing countries. Very ambitious project. So I'll cover a little bit of that, those three projects there. So the rural internet connectivity system, we had a partnership between SPC and Pacific Satellite Services, and they donated 16 pilot sites. So that they donated the dish and the surrounding infrastructure, and we used some of the $1 million to pay for the first year of internet connectivity. So we deployed these projects in, I can't remember exactly, maybe 6 or 10 countries. There's an interesting problem developed because in the rural areas, of course, there's no electricity, and we needed that, and the project really didn't cover that, so we had to become a little bit innovative and inventive to get power to these sites as well. And that's one of the things I think that was the biggest stumbling block. We seemed to be able to do the ICT side of things, but the electricity side of things was pretty hard to do and to sustain that. So one example that I might give of that is that we had a strong focus on ministries of health, and we were looking at the rural health stations that were scattered throughout the islands. And we worked with the government's Ministry of Health to install a satellite service at each of these Ministry of Health regional centres. And we then suggested some ideas about how they might be able to use it, so trying to suggest some ways that they could provide health services, like, for example, better management of drugs, also some teleconsultation type services. When I was talking to one country, I was asking them, how do they communicate with these regional health centres? And they said, oh, we have to get on a boat and it takes 2 days to get there, and then we spend a week there and then we come back again. Or they get on a boat and come to see us. I said, well, wouldn't it be better if you could have an instantaneous connection with them? Wouldn't that be helpful? They said, yes, that'd be very good. So I said, well, how about we take some of your transport budget and put it onto the ICT budget? And we said, ICT budget? What's that? We don't have an ICT budget. So in this particular instance, we installed the satellite solution, we managed to get some power to those satellite solutions, and we paid for the connectivity for the first 12 months, on the understanding that the government would pick up that payment afterwards. And of course, at the end of 12 months, I went round and spoke to them and said, well, where's the money? And they said, oh, we forgot to do that, sorry. So unfortunately, the service had to be disconnected because we didn't pay for the connectivity. The other project that I wanted to talk about was the SPIN project. At those days, it was pretty innovative to think that we would ever connect all of the islands. But this project was broken into two parts, the western part of the islands and the eastern part of the islands. We had a lot of strong support to make that happen. The leaders were very, very strong in support of that. And Dr. Jimmy Rogers was there as well, and ADB and the World Bank, and at later times Australian Aid and New Zealand Aid, those organisations stepped up. But I wanted to recount a funny story. When we were working out what this project was all about, I was talking to the World Bank expert who had some experience in doing submarine cables. And she said, well, Ian, we might be able to connect Tonga or perhaps Samoa, I don't know, maybe New Caledonia and PNG. But look, Kiribati, never, ever would we do Kiribati and Tuvalu. And Nauru and Niue as well. We could just never justify that. And I'm just really glad to say now that every one of those islands is going to be, or has been, connected to a submarine fibre cable. I think that's an awesome achievement. So I wish I could be as glad about the OLPC project as I was about the SPIN project. For those that didn't know, the MIT had a funder that allowed them to fund these laptops into schools. So we were donated 5,000 laptops for the region. And we worked with each Ministry of Education, I think in 10 or 12 countries. And that involved spending some time with them, talking about how would you use this, how does it help you in teaching and learning, developing a plan of making that work. We found that some schools and teachers and some ministries really struggled with the concept of children owning a laptop. It wasn't culturally appropriate. And that was something that we didn't consider. So the whole name, one laptop per child, was really quite countercultural. And in the end, we had some really good users of them. So in some countries, the Ministry of Education established a computer lab in the school, and then the children came in and learnt and things like that. They taught them how to use the computer. In other countries, particularly in countries where they had younger teachers that had been to USP and had some experience with ICT, they did some really innovative things. So in one country, I remember particularly, the exams were coming up, so the teachers gave the laptops to the children and said, do your own revision with the laptop. And of course, embedded in the laptop was a lot of content about curriculums and all of the items and everything. So those kids gladly took the computers and worked away and did very well in the exams. So it was one of the better examples of it. Some of the other comments that I wanted to make, in one country we spent 2 weeks training all the teachers how to use the laptops. And at the end we were just having a chat about that, and I was talking to one particular teacher who was, let's say, a senior teacher. And I was saying, what do you think about this? And she said, we shouldn't do this. Oh, why not? Well, because the children are going to learn more than us. And I was going to say to her, surely that's what education is all about, but I held my tongue and I didn't say that. But it was just an interesting story to say we obviously didn't meet that teacher's needs. So we failed in that regard. Yeah, let me see. The other problem, of course, and I won't dwell on it, is power to the schools, because in a lot of those places there was no power. So one story we had, in one country they nominated a particular school on the outskirts of the town. So we went there to talk about it, and we were talking about it, and they were quite excited about it. And we said, well, we hear that you've got power here. What is it? And they said, oh, solar power. Oh, okay, that's good. Can we go and have a look at it? So we went out, and this little shed in the outside there was had the solar panels there, looking really good. So we went inside the shed where the batteries should be, and there were no batteries. So what happened to the batteries? Oh, well, the last principal was transferred to another school, and he said those batteries belonged to him, so he took them with him. Rather an unexpected problem to deal with. So maybe I'll just touch on a couple of other regional initiatives, just to be complete here. Sometime after 3 years, I think, after working with SBC, the ICT responsibility, the regional responsibility, was transferred to USP, and they set up the ICT working group to drive ICT development. So in the ICT working group, there were, let me see, there was quite a lot of people, about 16 all told, groups and things. So I've got it listed down here. There were 6 different crop agencies involved. There were 4 UN agencies. There were 8 main donors, and there were 5 NGOs. So there's quite a lot of people that were being active in that area. And when I was doing my research for this talk, I found an article that was saying between 2007 and 2019, they had found 228 ICT projects with a grand total of $630 million. So, are you confused about who does what? I was, and I still am. So it's been quite a challenge to try and coordinate all those people, and that's what I guess it's what the ICT working group was trying to do, is to coordinate all these activities, to assist each other, to learn from each other, and move on. So from a regional point of view, we've now had 3 ICT strategies. So the first one went from 2006 to 2010, the second one from 2010 to 2016, and the third one to 2020. Just of an interest note that the ICT strategy 2016 to 2020 had 18 high priority projects. 18 high priority projects. Then there was triple that number of medium priority, and then there was even more. I didn't bother to count them, there was too many. So the interesting comment I made is that the ICT working group had developed this strategy, but they had no resources to implement it. The strategy was put out there. I'm not even sure if anyone read it, but it was put out there. But there was nothing they could do to implement any of those things. So in the end, the value of having the ICT strategy wasn't fully realised. And while I was doing this research for this paper, I was looking around for evaluations of these strategies. Did we actually evaluate them? It's interesting, we did one of them, the very first one that finished in 2010. An independent research company researched it and made a report about how successful the strategy was, and made a number of recommendations which I'm not sure really made their way into the second version of the strategy, and certainly not in the third version. So, and I just wanted to note a more recent development, if you're not aware, that the IT managers of the region are getting together now under the flagship of a digital dialogue and action plan, an ICT dialogue and action plan. So they're starting again to have another go at developing a strategy and an action plan. I'll make a comment about what I think about that in a minute. The other projects that I think are worthy of note during that period were housed at USP. So the first one was the regional Pacific Island Regional Regulatory Council. I can't remember. It was about providing advice to Pacific Islands to develop policies about regulations. So that was established for 2 or 3 years, I think. There was another project that was the Pacific CERT. So they established a computer emergency response team in USP. And again, after about 3 years, that seemed to lose funding or initiative, and I don't think it's there anymore. And they also funded a group which I was in charge of, was the Teachers Learning and E-Learning and Education Centre. And again, that's not there. So, I'll wrap up with a few comments and thoughts. For me, it was really interesting to go back and look at these projects from a distance, if you like, rather than being directly involved. But what I found it very hard to find information about these projects. And if you remember the 23 agencies that play with ICT in the region, you can imagine why it is hard, because a number of them have them in their own databases, often firewalled. Even the ICT working group was firewalled, so we didn't get to see anything from that. But all told, I think we've done a fairly poor job of reviewing the projects that we have had and learning the lessons that we should be learning. And I would challenge the ICT ministers now in their new initiative to say, please go back and look at the other strategies and see what's happened there and learn from that. So my comment was to say, what does this mean to IGF? And for me, the stuff that we've done in the past is not open and transparent. It is difficult to find. Often the projects have not been evaluated. We haven't learned the lessons. It's too hard to find the lessons if they do exist. So I wondered what we could do about that. And I noted that it may be interesting to talk about a need for an ICT development portal where we could have all of this information put together. And for those projects that haven't been evaluated, it would be really interesting to do an evaluation of them to learn from that. So my question was, where are the lessons learned and how do we share them? I'll put that to a challenge to you on this floor as part of IGF. It's something to consider in the way forward. I think a couple of other people have talked about you don't know where you're going if you can't see where you've been. Yeah, I had another question, and I'm not sure whether it's relevant or not, but I just wanted to throw this out there. In all of the work that I've done, there's always been this word called transformation in there, digital transformation. And I've never really heard what that means to the Pacific Islanders. I fear that it's a Western idea, and we have our own ideas about that, and we try and impose that on the islands. And I just think the most telling thing about all of the projects that I've been involved in so far is that we didn't get the transformation part of it right. We did the technology fairly well, but we didn't get the transformation right. And I just mention that as a challenge to you here if you're ever involved in doing any of these projects, that the transformation comes first, and from that we apply the technology to it. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much for your attention. I hope it's been helpful.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions for Ian?
Thank you for that talk, Ian. I think it's interesting to reflect on projects that at the time seemed really good, but then when you look at it now, you can't sort of find evidence of them. I'm curious, there's probably two elements to that. One is, sounded like quite a lot were dependent on some sort of government funding, and then at some point that government funding was removed. Was the issue that they weren't able to demonstrate their benefit and that's why they didn't get continued funding? Or was the issue that they should have actually started to think about building a bit more of some sort of sustainable business model around the initiative?
They're very good questions, and I'm not sure that I can answer all of them, but some of those projects were what I call proof of concept, and of course they have a limited life, but the issue I have there is that we didn't learn from that. So the VSAT project, for example, I know we've done a lot more work with VSATs, but was there some lessons to learn there? And the issue is, I think, that the donors, by and large, under-resourced projects. They don't have these soft elements in there. They have lots of money for the technology and capacity building too, that's another thing that they do, or developing policies and things. But there's nothing about the softer side of things of how do we make sure that the benefits of this comes out in the community. And yeah, maybe that's enough to say there. I think it's a complex issue, but worthy of a lot more investigation.
Thanks, Bruce. Any further questions? Over here, and then...
Kia ora, you've got lots of questions today. If there was a database of ICT projects in the Pacific, who'd be the logical organization to fund that on an ongoing basis?
Well, there's an interesting question there about regionally who has responsibility for ICT regional projects. These are not in-country projects, but they're regional projects. That's in transition at the moment, I think. I think USP was the nominated crop agency to coordinate all of that, but I don't believe they're doing very much about that now. And they had set up an ICT working group, which had about 17 different members, that is non-functional as I understand it at the moment. And I think the most recent initiative by the IT ministers to talk about this ICT dialogue and strategy and action plan, that may bring this out as an issue, but so far mostly I've seen them talking about resources. And I'm not sure that they've really learnt the lessons that we have learnt from past initiatives like that. So the answer is it's not clear.
Kia ora, Ian. Just want to...
We have a speaking order, sorry. My apologies. And can I ask each speaker to introduce themselves when they're asking a question? We had Bruce Tonkin from Outer with the first question and Jonathan Brewer with the second question, just for the record. And over here was our next speaker, and I'll come to you next, sorry.
Yeah, good morning. It's Tino Vitale from Tokelau. So I wear a few hats. I think to answer the question, I think we were not well prepared. I think the capability, the capacity within our communities, given Tokelau is very small, there were a lot of things going on at that time. The entrepreneur were coming in with, good deals that we kind of went with it, but I think the transfer of knowledge was not quite well done, and I think the coordination point was not well coordinated as well with the many. I was around in 1997, and then I left 2014. I just came from Perth in Tonga, and they've got the Pacific, Blue Ocean strategy, which also has an ICT component in it. So it's interesting that I didn't hear it but I think that's another project that I think the Pacific needs to actually get together and coordinate, and I'll be really interested. This is my first outing in this kind of environment. It'll be really interesting to see how this group can actually work through some of the things that you actually were speaking about. So thank you for enlightening us for that, and I'm really encouraged to have a talanoa with the rest of the community to see how well we can actually move forward. Hi, Keith.
Hi, Tina.
I'm
just
not
as
sure.
an observation there, sorry, if I could, I used to own and operate an ISP back in the 1990s and early 2000s, and I was the ISP for the Tokelau's back then when they had 2 dial-up lines to New Zealand, and Tino would ring sometimes and say, can you look at my mailbox and just delete any spam, because I've only got an hour of internet time to use. So they were good old days.
It's a good point, Keith, and it just reminds us in the 30 years that we've been doing this work since 1994, a lot has happened. And I don't want to play that down in any way at all. We've done some amazing things. My concern is, have we really learnt the lessons?
Any further questions over here?
Kia ora tātou, Witu Whala. I'm on the Council of Internet New Zealand. Thank you so much for all of your contributions in the past, of which I was aware of, but it's so good to hear it straight from your mouth. So I'm really taken in with your observations regarding transformation. I'm on the side of strategic governance. I'm not technologically minded, any of that type of thing. So here in Aotearoa, our academics, Professor Graham Smith, I'll shout out, he is my relation, he developed academically a kaupapa Māori framework, which is now being applied to all sectors of our work. In your work through the Pacific, and there'll be many academic Pacific strategic thinkers here today, are you encountering more of what we would call a tukalau approach to ICT, a Samoan approach to ITC? Is there a plug-in the Pacific of Pacific thought that we can use for this transformation of our communities?
Another very good question, which I don't really feel qualified to fully answer. I would preface any comments to say that I've been retired for the last 5 years. So I'm not up to date with the latest. One negative aspect to that is that he who has the money speaks the loudest. And I'm not saying that in a critical way to the donors that are in the room, but very largely that agenda is set up when the money is being allocated and the KPI is introduced. And I've never seen a KPI yet that talked about culture, adaptation, transformation or anything. It's always been about the technology. So I'd put a challenge to the donors to say, maybe you should be more open and considering those elements as part of the project and resourcing the project to deal with those things.
Noya from Tuvalu Telecom. Thank you, Jan, for the storyboard that you've told, reminiscing the old days. My question is basically around what would you say now, with all the experience that you've got, formulating or developing the ICT strategy back then, than the Rangatoi agreement that the leaders just endorsed late last year? What would be your comment? Are we learning the lessons, or are we repeating the same thing?
First of all, I'd like to say the most successful project that we've ever done in the region has been the submarine cable project. That's been awesome to do that, you know. What we achieved there was really fantastic, and I think we all need to pat ourselves on the back about that, because that was a phenomenal feat to do. In terms of other lessons that we've learned, yeah, I think it boils down to, at the initial stage of defining the project, build in this community participation and involvement and contribution. All too often, when the donor agencies put the dollars there, they have technical KPIs at the end of them to justify spending the money. And that's the biggest weakness of all of the projects that I've seen, is that the benefits are not coming through as quickly as we wanted them to, as we thought they would. And that's because we didn't really identify them, we didn't really put resources for them, we didn't put KPIs, measurements and the values in there for them. But I would get back to saying, one of the things that we haven't done well is what I mentioned before about evaluation of these projects. And even if the project is evaluated for the donor, that information is not freely available to us in the Pacific. And I think that concept of a digital portal of some sort, where all of this information is there, free and open access for anybody to investigate and look at and comment on and learn from, would be one of the key initiatives I think that we should be taking.
Fabulous. I think we'll make this the last question. Oh no, we've got one.
Sotena from Samoa. My question is around the context of access. Given the Pacific is quite remote, the cost that we pay for internet is because of the logistic problems. Currently, we are facing economic issues as well, so many of the Pacific people prioritize life and survival. How do we address the logistic problem in terms of reducing internet costs? Because building a 4G tower, you need to build the roads. The roads need to have engineers that know how to navigate the soil. And also you need to figure out how does this tower withstand Cyclone 5 level. And that's only one time. But if there is a cyclone, how do we sustain the long-term transition of products to recover those towers? So for the Pacific, the internet is basically the cost of logistics that the people take. How do we address that?
I am tempted to say it all comes down to money. But I saw a figure the other day that said since ICT ever existed in the region, there's been $900 million spent on ICT projects in the region, which leads me to say that's a lot of money. Maybe that's not the issue. Maybe the issue is being better prepared to do these things the way that you want them to be done. Rather than taking a hand out, you should be giving the donor a hand up, if you like. I think that would be a good step in the right direction. And again, I put it out to the IGF here to say perhaps that's the role the IGF can play more actively.
Thanks, Ian. We've got one question here, then over there, and that'll be the final question because we've got more speakers to come.
Thank you, Keith.
Lebu Hollander from the tiny islands of Yap in Micronesia. I just wanted to add to actually just kind of like what you just commented on. There are 2 points that you made, you know, the funding and resources, and then also the definition of digitization can be very different for two different worlds. So the funding side, I just wanted to make a comment that I think you hit it on the point that there's a lot of money, and in my experience, I think the challenge was there was a lot of funds that was given to our nation, and there was no excuse why nothing is hit the ground. We had to take our own actions for our own communities. We started at the community level, and maybe this is part of that portal solution or talk, that the community level has to be incorporated as a voice I think that has been echoed all over. Because sometimes not just about the funds are there, but sometimes when it comes from it can get easily stuck on the top where it's just overbloated with regulatory, overbloated there, and very little action on the ground. So just wanted to comment on that and comment about the definition of digitization. I'm coming from a place that we still have rich culture and digitization. And I just happen to be lucky to have been abroad in the tech industry. I've done digitization for modern companies. And going back home, I know what that means. It can literally it can literally wipe out what's beautiful out there, our culture and everything, because digitization is probably harder than actually forming a new nation, because you gotta, and in that process, so who should be leading that, you know what I mean, and so forth. So I just wanted to commend you for adding, for bringing that up. That's a very good point.
Thanks for your comments. When I was writing my notes, I had put something in there about e-government, because that seems to be a bit of a catchphrase at the moment, and it's transformation of government through digitisation. And I just think, I can't help but think we've got that wrong, because we talk about e-government, and the E comes first. It's really not that. It's about better government through the use of technology. And I think if we start off in the right step, in the right direction, we've got a much better chance of getting people involved in that and understanding the issues, and therefore getting a much better result out of it, out of what we do. So I'll just question a few things along those lines about, are we thinking about this the right way? Thank you.
I have a final question over here.
Good morning. My name is Kyle, and I work at the Foreign Fisheries Agency based in Honiara, Solomon Islands. I just want to respond to the questions that Yen has put to the floor. I've worked with Yen at USP for a number of years, and I've been in the region in terms of the IT space for quite some time. And I know exactly what is happening in the region in terms of the ICT. What we've learned a lot of lessons. And that's why we are seeing now a lot of countries is moving into the submarine cable. Why? Because they've actually learned what has happened before. In terms of the failure, in terms of the project that he raised, it's our failure. It's the failure is at the national level, because we are trying to adopt the regional initiatives to be our national initiative. No, it doesn't work that way. It works in some of the initiatives, but not all. Take, for instance, the Pacific CERT at USP. It didn't work in that context of a regional lens. Look at the Tonga CERT. Look at the Samoa CERT. They're working. Why? Because it's been developed from a national lens, not from a regional lens. The other contributing factor to that failure, because the members didn't actually pay their contribution to the Pacific CERT. Why? Because they have their own national interest. So taking these two examples here, the Tonga CERT and the Samoa CERT, and I know some of the countries will come on board to have their own CERT, they actually contribute to the national interest in terms of looking after their IT space. So in that context, the regional context in terms of the CERT didn't work. So to answer your question, yes, we've learned a lot of lessons, and that's why we see a lot of changes in the region now. You know, they're coming towards, we used to say, oh, we need to build infrastructure. Now they're actually slowly moving into the cybersecurity space, which is something that we in the past doesn't exist in the Pacific. Now we're slowly moving there. So with those comments, thank you very much.
I think that was more of an observation than a question, so thank you for that. I think just to sum it up, just one observation from me, Ian. The $100 one laptop per child, I wonder if they ever come up on eBay and whether the value is now considerably more than $100 because they would be a collector's item.
Yeah, it's interesting because they never made them for $100 anyway. It was about $300 or $400. But yes, there were quite a few of those laptops left in the region, stored away somewhere, and I've really forgotten where they are. Yeah. So perhaps you could resurrect them and sell them on eBay.
Indeed. Anyway, thank you, Ian. And,
thank you.
Now our penultimate panellist, Don Hollander. Don and I go back to 1980s when we were young children playing together in the wilds of ICL computing and things. So, welcome, Don.
Thank you. My name is, oh, look at that. My name is Don Hollander, and I've been working in IT for a long time. Just around the turn of the century, I went to Samoa as the pule of CSL. So Talofa Lava, those from Samoa. And CSL at the time, possibly still, but I've lost track, was the largest ICT operator in Samoa. We had 34 competitors from my memory. And this little talk that I gave in 2006, 2007, 2011 was really based on how to grow the business in Samoa and a lot of other Pacific countries. So what I did is I created this imagination of what an ICT enabled village in the Pacific would constitute. Now, I'm told I've got just 90 seconds for this presentation, so I'm not going to give the whole one, but oh, this is not the one that I wanted. Maybe I will give the whole one. So we said, how is ICT going to make a difference? And I'm hoping Andrew will share this in the mailing list. We were looking at communications. We were looking at how religion, disaster recovery, weightless exports. We thought that could be make a big difference. I don't think it did. We thought the creative skills and talents, at least in Samoa for software development, would be well developed, and I don't think they are particularly in the Pacific. So I'll go through this relatively quickly. So we talked about having community radio, email, business stock management. Anybody here still use email? Yeah, not too many. Everybody, but we thought this would make a big difference for people doing export, imports. We're focused mostly on exports. Web browsers, this was a long time ago. Anybody still use a web browser? Or is everything, I think, just app-based? And electronic banking, that I think has been successful almost everywhere, including places where not traditional banking accessed through a front end, but actual banking within the phone and within the phone network. We thought this newfangled thing called FPOS would be possible. Anybody still use an FPOS card in New Zealand anyway? Anybody still? We just take our watches and somehow they let us walk away with goods. Telephone, I think telephones are still a thing.
Health, we thought was going to be a big deal. I can't tell in the Pacific, but Ian said he tried to leverage the health capability, and as long as somebody else was paying for it, people were willing to take his opportunity. But when his funding ran out, which was pilot and seeding funding, and so then things disappeared. In Tokelau, I remember very much when we were there, and Dr. Adams was a Wellington doctor who would go up from time to time. Great place for drugs. He was very supportive, and he introduced this whole idea that you're out in the middle of nowhere. There might be a nurse. What do you do? Somebody comes in. So the story that I tell is somebody went in to the nurse that had a problem in their eye. The nurse couldn't figure it out. In fact, Dr. Adams was there. He couldn't figure it out, but he was able to take a picture, email it to a friend, and within 10 minutes he had a diagnosis and how to fix it. So I still think this is wonderful. Farming information, don't know, should be. Education, these are very old. This is the state of the art of PowerPoint in 2006. And two-way radios, Google Maps, that is available most places. I don't know about Tokelau, you got Google Maps there? So lots of stuff. The things, as I looked over the past couple of days, what was successful and what wasn't. Email and family communications, that was a core successful transaction. Things that I don't think was particularly successful, as I said, was the weightless exports. And I didn't get a sense that religious studies and sharing services was particularly popular. So when I went to look for churches in Samoa that were broadcasting their services to the world, that didn't seem to be happening, and I thought it would be. And my last story, 2006, just before YouTube. So we did a project with Televis Samoa. We tried to do it with Televis Niue. They didn't. That didn't work. But Televis Samoa, as part of my role, and I know I'm over time. One of the tasks that I had as the Bule of CSL was we were sponsors of the Miss Samoa pageant, and one of my obligations was to meet each of the candidates for Miss Samoa, and the one that I liked, they were all very nice, but the one that I was more inclined to vote for, though I didn't get a vote, was Miss Samoa USA. She did not win. So I asked people, why didn't she win? And they said, her Samoan was not good enough. She was fluent in Samoa, but she didn't have contemporary dialect. So I said, fine, we'll help that going forward. So let's take Televis Samoa, and at the end of each show, they would run a tape, put it through a process that digitized it, put it, at that point, still a satellite, I think, or just shifting to, and then it was available, we would host it, and then it was available for anybody outside of Samoa to A, be aware of the dialect, and B, to hear what was happening at home. So some things worked. The weightless exports I don't think work, and the religious stuff didn't work as much as I thought. but YouTube came along and replicated our project. And so that's what we did in the early 2000s, and some sense as to whether it's achieved or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Is there a quick burning question for Don? We're running a bit short of time. I thought there'd be loads. You can. Right. So it's my turn now. My name's Keith Davidson. I'm, for my sins, I'm a former newspaper printer and publisher, former ISP owner, former chairman of the board and CEO of Internet NZ, former chairman of Asia Pacific Top Level Domain Association, APTLD, former ISOC director, former convener of the Pacific IGF in 2011. Currently, I am the vice chair of PIR, the operators of .org. We're a US-based corporate. We turn over about $100 million US a year. We make $65 million a year profit, and we hand that $65 million to the Internet Society to enable them to do their work. And the Internet Society funds operations like the Internet Engineering Task Force, and a lot of outreach on the internet, and has a vested interest in the internet governance model. So I think I know a little about the space. What I'm going to do today is give you a discussion about the good, the bad and the ugly. And sadly, you don't have Clint Eastwood, you have me to present this. But I'm going to pick the pieces out of the various discussions we've had up here today and try and analyse what I think was good, what was bad and what was ugly, and then try and project an image for the future for you. So I think the good, definitely the telecommunications deregulation in the Pacific was a major milestone. It's still going on. There are some countries who still don't have a competitive environment for telecommunications, but it is happening, and it continues to happen. And the power of that deregulation has led to massive reductions in prices for phone and internet, albeit acknowledging your question earlier, still too expensive in many instances. But the competitive market for phone and internet has been a major go-forward process. Fibre to the island has been fabulous too, as Ian was saying. Most of the main islands have fibre, but it's still, there's work to do there, but it's a great thing to have that fibre because it allows those islands to compete with the rest of the world in terms of the timing of their communication and so on. I'm really fascinated that I do some work in Vanuatu and have done for several years. They have a little island to the very north of Vanuatu that doesn't have internet and doesn't have telephone, but virtually every resident has a smartphone, and they communicate via Bluetooth, and they find their own ways, and they're upskilling themselves through using the smartphone. So I think for the Pacific, the smartphone has been one of the key instruments in good for the delivery of the internet. The cheapness of power for recharging your cell phone and the sheer price of a cell phone device is, you virtually have your $100 device. And I think things have moved really well. The mobile money app that now is available in the Pacific allows people to do their payments without horrendous bank fees, their international payments and so on. So these are things that are really good, really positive and moving nicely forward, and so they should continue. But let's go to the bad. I think we saw from the late 1990s with groups like the Pacific Island chapter of ISOC, this growing interest in internet governance and where it might be useful as a discussion forum for how to improve internet and ICT in the Pacific. I think we got to 2011 in Noumea, where SPC convened for us. That's the Secretariat of the Pacific Islands, or Pacific Community. And we had about 100 people at that event, so somewhat similar to today. But the interesting thing there was we fundraised by tapping various organisations on the shoulder to get real money together. So I think we had 10 organisations, Internet NZ, our Oz Registry and others, putting in $10,000 US dollars each to make a pool of $100,000 that we spent on getting around 70 people fellowshipped to that event. So that to me was the sort of the peak of interest in internet governance, and we've seen it tailing off a little bit since. You know, the Pacific Island Forum seems less interested. They used to convene a Ministers of ICT meeting annually up until about that point and then didn't anymore. They went to prime ministerial meetings, and Internet and IG was lucky to make it on the agenda. I think AP Regional IGF uses the P in AP Regional IGF and largely concentrates on Asia and well-developed economies, and hasn't had very much interest in the Pacific, although to their credit they did convene the Asia Pacific Regional IGF in Vanuatu in 2018, and that might have been a bit of an eye-opener to them, but I don't think they've followed through. I think APTLD used to be pretty keen on Pacific engagement with the CCTLD operators in the Pacific, but I think that has gone away in recent years, and they've concentrated more on other parts of Asia that were formerly difficult to reach. Internet NZ had a wonderful little program that we called PIP, the Pacific Internet Partnership, that was funded initially by Internet NZ, UNESCO and UNDP, and that allowed, again, travel fellowships to get Pacific Islanders to meetings and get speakers along to the Pacific. But that largely dried up and doesn't appear to exist anymore. So funding is always an issue. We talked about money being the key. I think maybe things like COVID have stood in the way of further developments. Disappointingly, Australia was running its own Australian IGF, and New Zealand was running its Net Hui. I think COVID and other things and other politics have stood in the way of those things. But again, New Zealand and Australia should be taking the lead, and it does appear that they may be now taking the lead for doing more in that regard as an exemplar model for the Pacific. The ugly, I think generally the idea of e-health and e-education have been failures in the Pacific. I mean, these programs do exist, but they're lightweight. And I know from my experiences in Vanuatu, if people have medical problems, they're flown into Port Vila and treated and flown home. And so often those people didn't need to fly at all. So the funding that is being used to fly them could be instead used for e-health just by diagnosis via internet and so on. So, I think that's pretty awful. I think the WSIS coming up, Rieko talked about the early WSIS, the World Summit on the Information Society. That ended in 2005 with the Tunis Accord, which painted a map for internet governance, which led to the Global Internet Governance Forum, which I think started off quite successfully, but seems to be fizzling out as a useful forum for multi-stakeholder dialogue. And I'll come to the reasons why shortly. The WSIS process itself is a multilateral discussion. It's government to government. In all of the preparatory meetings, it ends up with governments speaking all day, and then business and civil society given 5 minutes each at the end of the day to have their input. So it's not a useful process when governments can be confused about what actually is happening in their country relating to the internet and internet governance. And so that projecting forward, that and the ITU and other UN bodies tend to like this multilateral model and don't want to necessarily follow the multi-stakeholder model. So I think that's quite ugly as well. I think without multi-stakeholderism, the future of the internet becomes quite fractious. So looking forward to the future, big congratulations to AUDA and to APNIC and to Internet NZ for their reinvigorating this event here, and and to the Pacific Island chapter of ISOC, congratulations to you for ensuring there is a continued IGF, and also to Vanuatu itself, which has its own annual in-country IGF, and it gathers a lot of people, useful people together for dialogue. I think your government benefits from that greatly in terms of listening carefully to what people have to say. I think the future, fibre to the smallest populated island is still the essential pipe dream. Without it, you don't have real connectivity. Perhaps Starlink and satellite going forwards might provide a more expedient way of connecting, but it needs to be done. And until everybody's connected, you can't say that you have a society that is based on equity and fairness and reasonableness. I think education for the future is a massive issue. As we see better connectivity, the scamming, the spamming, the cybercrime, the lack of cyber security and so on is really a massive need on the way forward to protect people, to protect ourselves from being ripped off. We need lots of young, and I see this room's full of young enthusiastic people to step forward. Don and Ian and I are far too old to worry about this for the future, so we're utterly reliant on everybody in the room to step up and work towards the viability of the multi-stakeholder model, whether that be in ICANN or at ISOC or in your local in-country IGF or in the Pacific IGF. Your voice is needed. And let me just reiterate what multi-stakeholderism is. It is bottom-up. It comes from the people. It's not top-down, it's bottom-up. It is open and transparent, consensus-based decision-making. Consensus doesn't mean unanimous, but by far the majority of the room agrees, the country agrees, the region agrees that this is what should happen. And that it's a forum for civil society, for academia, for the technical community, for governments to come together and have that dialogue, and that it is an equal platform, that governments are not given preferential treatment in any way. Governments, of course, have the right and the obligation to make law, and they always will. But what multi-stakeholderism can do is inform the government how to make better law, how to make robust, useful law. And so that dialogue is vitally important, and it can't exist in a vacuum. It can't exist with just the technical community or just academia or just government. It must be something where everybody can hear, listen, observe, and develop consensus. So I give you that as my challenge to you for the future. And I'd like to say, oh, there's a question. All right, and I'll take any questions. No? Excellent. No. Oh, Andrew. All right. You've got a question, and you just right. All right. I'd just like to thank my panelists, Ellen online, Rieko, Ian, and Don. And can you put your hands together to thank them for the session? Up to you, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Keith. We're almost on time, but we went over a few minutes, but that's okay. I'd like Ian just to come up. As I said earlier, these are pioneers of internet governance in the region. Now, you will notice that they are all Kiwis, right? So we decided that while we're here in New Zealand, we're going to acknowledge them. So I'll ask Sarai to a small token of appreciation. Is not only for today, but for the years. It's just a small token of appreciation, just on behalf of everybody from the Pacific that have been impacted because of your work in the Pacific. So I'll ask Sarai to give yours.
Is it Carver?
I don't know. Unfortunately, we can't give you one, Ellen, but I'll bring it to Auckland when I'm there. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much. I think that is the end of our session. But if you want to take pictures with them, please feel free. Yeah. You might not see this group again next year in Pacific IGF, so have this opportunity to acknowledge them and take the picture. Anju. Okay, thank you so much. Our next session will start at 2, which is digital transformation trends. Another interesting session. So please come back after lunch is outside. Please help yourself. I think it's started. So find something to eat, continue to mingle, and enjoy your lunch.